pick back up where we're going to save a gradient swatch. So right now, what I'm going to do is I've worked with my swatch that I want to save, and I'll go over here and I'm going to change. Remember, I talked about kind of making it go top and bottom. I'm going to change my angle of view right here, and then when we click underneath, I've already saved it right here, but right here is an option to save that swatch or add to your swatches. So I'll make a couple little changes. We'll make that a little bit darker, a little bit more dramatic, and now right here it says add to swatches. The only one that will not work with is if you, oh, that's fancy. If you are working with the freeform gradient, you can save your radial gradients and you can save your linear gradients, but you can't save your freeform ones. So just keep that in mind, that you're going to apply to an actual object. So if I'm happy with this, I'm going to go down here. I'm going to say new gradient swatch, and then you'll notice it shows up right there in your swatches. And what I always do when I'm working with a gradient is I kind of click back out of it. So you'll notice now if I change my shape, you'll see how it's applying it dynamically to how that shape is functioning. So I've got my background, and let's say that I'm pretty happy with that and I don't want to make any more changes to it. So what I would do right here is I would go through and I would lock my background so I don't accidentally work on that layer. The next thing I'm going to go is I'm going to work with my city elements. And so this is where we start to have some fun with shapes. So about halfway down, once again, you'll notice that I've got my shape tool. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my rectangle tool once again. And let's say we want to make some shapes kind of pop out nicely. And since my background's locked, as I go through and draw out my shapes, you'll notice that it's not affecting the background. I can click all I want on the background and nothing's happening. So when you're working with a shape, you can do a couple of different things. Once you draw it out, it's completely manipulable. So I can click on any of the edges, I can make them taller, I can make them smaller, I can make them really skinny. So you can go through and kind of play with how those shapes look and how they function. So I'm just going to go ahead and make some shapes. And the thing to remember about Illustrator is that you don't want to work harder than you need to. So some of these shapes I might want to repeat. So what I'm going to do is on the Mac, I'm going to hold down Option, and you'll notice that if I hover over an object, my mouse turns into a double mouse. And if I click and drag, I've now made an exact copy, and I can go through and I can manipulate that copy if I wanted to. And let's say I want to repeat all three of these. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click the first one, and I'm going to hold down Shift, select all three, hold down Option, and repeat. So if you're doing a skyline or something of that nature where you're repeating a lot of shapes, don't feel like you have to draw each one out. You can actually kind of take that nice shortcut. You can draw it out and repeat elements as often as you need to. So we've got several shapes, and if I go through, I can also use the ellipse tool, which is a circle. If I hold down Shift, I'll make a perfect circle. And once your shape is drawn, you can go back in and you can change the color of it. So I'm going to go through and I can change and I can work with the color. I can also add a gradient to that if I wanted to. So if I go back down to my gradient tool, and all I have to do is just kind of click right in there. I could change it to a radial if I wanted to, and kind of play with what that looks like. And then of course gradients can be applied to all of these shapes too. Either I can click on the one that I want to work with, I can go and I can change the angle of it. And you can see that this one's matching the background. So there's actually a sense of atmosphere that's happening as I'm working with these. And then I can also, if I wanted to go back in and work with my freeform one, I can click and kind of drag these points around within that shape as well. So if you ever get stuck in a tool, just always go back to that black mouse right there. And if you don't like what you did, what I would do is select it and then just hit delete. And you can start over again and kind of play with it. Now I kind of like what's happening here. It kind of has a sunrise feel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select multiple objects. And I'm going to go to that gradient. And you'll see that right now it's going from left to right, but I can change that angle. And then this is kind of an interesting look. Now you can see that this is starting to be a little bit too harsh. So what I can also do is I can also adjust the opacity of either one of my colors. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through and I'm going to change the opacity. And I'm just changing the opacity on that one side. So you can see it's kind of fading and blending a little bit better into the background. So these are my big city elements that I'm working with. The next thing that I might be working with are, say, windows or small elements. And this is where really you're going to notice the difference between how Photoshop works and how Illustrator works. So I've got my ellipse tool. I've also got a polygon tool. So if I draw that out, and as I'm drawing my shape, I can change the number of sides. So I'm clicking and I'm not letting go, and I'm using the up and down arrows on my keyboard. And I can also hold shift, and that'll constrain it to, I believe, 45-degree angles. And so I can draw a triangle if I want to, and I can fill that with a color. And now you're noticing that I'm working with a shape off to the side. And so this is referred to, this gray area right here is your artboard. And so a lot of times what I do is I work with my artboard. I kind of play with shapes over on this side. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make a series of windows. So I'm going to go back to my rectangle tool. And I'm going to just draw out a bunch of little windows. And so remember what I said. I can draw my shape just one time. And I'm going to hold down Option, and I'm going to click and drag it. You can also hold Shift, and it'll keep it in that same place. So I've got 2 little windows. And now I have 4 little windows. And you'll notice I'm just kind of clicking and dragging. And so now I have a nice little set of windows right here. So right here, I've got my big city elements, and I'll see if I can bring that window out a little bit. So here are my buildings, and then up here, I've got my smaller city elements. I'm going to click and drag. And I can also resize these. So I'm clicking and I'm dragging all of them. If I hold down Shift, that will resize them all at the same time, because right now they're a little bit big. So now I can go in and I can add my windows, and you can see that there's pretty high contrast with this. So I think I might want to go through and soften it a little bit. And I've got a little bit of vibration happening there, but that's okay. So the other thing that I can also do that's helpful with my shapes is right now I've got all my shapes connected, but if I unclick them, they're going to kind of, I'll end up grabbing kind of each one individually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to Object, and I'm going to say Group, and you'll see that it'll change a little bit. So now, no matter which one I click on, it allows me to grab the entire group. And so what's helpful with that is I can then drag the group over to certain areas. And I can also select the group by holding down Shift and selecting multiple groups at the same time, and then going through and changing their color dynamically. So we'll kind of go through and play. We could also make these a gray if we wanted to. And you can see I'm kind of changing my colors all at once so that it moves pretty quickly. I do want to make sure that I'm saving as I'm working, so I'm going to go up to File, and I'm going to go down to Save. And I always suggest you guys save on your computer because we don't want to lose our files. So we'll say save on our computer. And we'll go ahead, just go ahead and save it as the Adobe Illustrator document. If it looks something like that, that's fine. Just know where you're saving it. And I'll put it on my desktop, and I'll say save. And then everything else you can just go ahead and say, okay, that's fine. So I'll go ahead and say that looks okay. And then the last thing that we're going to work with is our atmospheric effects. So this is one where you could kind of play with building clouds or rain or whatever you want to do. I'm going to build a cloud right now with circles. So I'm going to go down to my shape tool once again. I'm going to go to my ellipse tool. And you'll notice if you accidentally click once, it'll ask you how you want to build that shape tool. You can just say cancel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just draw out some shapes. Oops. And one of the things that we can do is we can connect our shapes together. And this is a nice way to kind of organize kind of our elements and manipulate the shapes in a little bit of a different way. So I've got a nice cloud-like shape, but you'll notice as I'm clicking that there are it's made up of lots of different shapes. So to combine a shape together, I'm going to click and drag, and then I'm going to go over to my Pathfinder tool. And if I go down to Pathfinder, this will come up. And so what this allows me to do is to combine my shapes in some different ways. I'm going to show you what that looks like because this can be kind of fun. The first, if you just kind of hold over, it says unite. And so what it'll do is it'll just make one solid shape. And so I can take that one solid shape and I can kind of play with it over there. Um, I might want to blend it. I might want to work with a little bit of a gradient. You know, I could go back through and I can make my own gradient. So if I want it to feel a little bit more like a cloud, if I go back here, I want to, of course, change the angle. I can go here and kind of play with it fading up. And then once again, I can also change like where this is happening. So it might be, I want to change my opacity back to 100%. And I want to bring it down a little bit. I want to kind of blend it a little bit better. Maybe I want to change the opacity of this one. And so you can kind of go through and play with it and see what you like. So one of the other ways that we can work with, and I'm just going to step backwards. And you can always go up to Command Z. All right, and now I've got my original shape back here. I'm going to select it again, and we're going to take a look at some of the other options. There's also minus the front, so whatever shapes are sitting on the front are going to be taken away. There's also where your elements are intersecting. Oops, hold on. And then there's also where they're excluding. So you can see I can make a really interesting kind of fun shape that way too. So Pathfinder is another way where we can combine our shapes together in some different ways and add some different visual elements. So actually that's really quite interesting. I can go back up and you'll see now it's applying it to each one of the shapes. And so that's something for you to think about as well in terms of how it's kind of playing with it and what it looks like. So I can go back in and I can also pick a solid color for it. And then I can also manipulate kind of the transparency of it as well if I wanted to. So there's several different ways I can go through and I can kind of play with these elements within the space. So you've got the option to play with your atmosphere, your city elements, your small ones, your big ones, and then also your backgrounds. And then just remember to save frequently as you're working.